Earth, our dear blue planet, our cosmic home. Although we were living in a technological world today and we thought about what surrounds us, many mysteries still persist. No doubt we easily know the surface of our planet, these different ecosystems, its mapping and topology. The same goes for the ocean floor, since the innovations technologies have allowed us to descend into the dark depths waters of the Earth to discover a world that seen from the surface seems to us very strange. All his knowledge of our planet has been possible for us thanks to technological advances. Large submarine satellites, depths and other complex machinery allowed us to cross the physical barriers that our good old human explorers of centuries past, armed only with their courage and their inflexible will, could not decently not cross. We were able to visualize our entire planet, map it and memorize it on its entirety, or at least on its exterior. In spite of that, it remains a part of shadow intrinsic to our planet, a mystery for someone, for others theoretical knowledge about the heart of our planet, the very bowels of this celestial body on which we have all been moving for millennia, seems to still harbor a veil of mystery today, nourishing the imagination of men and nourishing the insatiable curiosity of more eager for knowledge. Ultra-advanced technology, so as not to say futuristic, would close this debate, scanning entirely from a set and, for example, thus revealing to the big day what our beautiful Gaia hides under her Earth's crust. But for now, if we want to try to perceive the mysteries of bowels of the Earth, we can only base ourselves on two things: where our material scientific knowledge of what we were able to observe, measure and quantify, and in a second vision, more holistic things about the various testimonies of people with drank a particular experience in relation to this subject. The problem major is that by putting these two visions in parallel, we obtain a real opposition, almost incompatible. And since the facts go first time to contradict the holistic view of the various testimonies, this last will therefore have great difficulty in being heard. Yet the information from these unusual experiences would allow perhaps to see our planet and our world differently concerning the center of the Earth, or at least those that make up the interior of this star, those who are under our feet, under the Earth's crust where we all evolve. We can distinguish four main visions of things. First, the official Cartesian vision, the one we teach in our schools, proclaiming that our planet is a succession of layers, geological, starting from a central ferrous nucleus encompassing a mantle of magma, is covered on its outside with a crust, solid Earth, thus allowing the development of life on its surface. To oversimplify and schematize this vision of the Earth, our planet as a ball of glowing lava covered with a thin solid crust. The second vision of our planet will not allow said to glimpse a center, since it is the flat Earth theory. We are not going to discuss this topic here because it deserves a video 8 years entirely dedicated, but to put it simply, according to this assumption, since the Earth would be a plain disk, it seems unlikely that we can glimpse the hypothesis of a center, or at least of a geology internal, since under the terrestrial disk it would be the vacuum, the space. The third vision of our planet, and the one we call the hollow Earth, this idea dates back to the 17th century and has many variations as to the possibility of an internal world. The visions resulting from this hypothesis of a totally hollow planet sheltering in its center a kind of mini-sun, allowing a development of life on the inner part of the Earth's crust. The Corsicans of our planet would then be like a sheet of paper on which parts and others evolve life forms. Other hollow Earth visions convey the idea that our planet would be made up of several successive naughty spaced out others, thus allowing the image of Dahl's Russian existence of internal worlds superimposed on each other. But the most common view of this theory certainly remains that of the empty shell open at the pole. In this hypothesis, the terrestrial globe would be totally hollow, shelters in its center a nucleus emitting heat and light, allowing a life to develop on the inner side of the Earth's crust. This vision generally offers the poles north and south of the Earth, gigantic openings allowing an exchange between the surface world and the internal world. But the new internals of the Earth is not limited to the purely geological vision of our planet, since for millennia men have associated with the bowels of Gaia the existence of mystical places of worship, or even 1020 the kingdoms of the underworld of Greek mythology. For example, place under the surface of the Earth, the place of residence of the dead directed by Hades, god of the underworld. We can also note the Absaut of Sumerians, vast underground aquatic world and abode of gods stretching back over 5,000 years. In North America, the disunited peoples feed the tradition according to which their ancestors came to the territory under land and would have colonized the surface of the Earth. These tribes would have remained in contact with what he calls the people of the ants, of protective individuals living in the intra-earth, and what not to do reference to guarding this mystical underworld kingdom of wisdom, of peace and purity. This underground civilization civilization would be connected to the different surface continents by a vast network of galleries, but its discovery would be possible only to people demonstrating a real inner purity. All these hypotheses and these planetary myths have generated a multitude of research and expeditions of all kinds, which even if carried out by men with good intentions and unquestionable ardor are unfortunately never managed to provide us with material proof of the existence of these underground worlds. Obviously inside our planet has always aroused in men a source of mystery and questioning, and this since the beginning of our civilization. But concretely, that can we think of all these visions of the interior of the earth? If imagination makes it possible to create the most eccentric hypotheses, some FAI will come and put things back in place. However, if this idea persistent throughout history that our planet would hide in its heart other worlds is also present in the collective unconscious, maybe there is really something, or at least a base concrete at the origin of all this. The conventional vision that of the layers geological seems hardly compatible with the notion of world internal physics, as temperatures rise considerably with the depth associated with the presence of the mantle magmatic under the Earth's crust would not allow the physical presence of internal terrestrial Corsican atmosphere or all the conditions necessary for development of life. Regarding the view of our planet as being, the question therefore does not arise, since of one, this has never been proven as demonstrated, and that of two, if this was the case, there couldn't be two underground worlds. Finally, for the third vision of the center of our planet, that of the false Prussians, even if the resulting diagrams are very nice, many physical problems will contradict her. The volcanic activity of our planet, for example, could only very hardly be explained by this hypothesis of the hollow earth. Indeed, the amount of material ejected during the largest volcanic eruptions, just like the phenomenal underground magmatic pressures generating this type of disaster, requires depths and temperatures well greater than the few hundred kilometers generally accepted in this empty shell vision of our planet. To name just one example contemporary of this volcanic excessiveness, the eruption of a volcano Icelandic in 2010, whose name but literally unpronounceable paralyzed much of the northern hemisphere's air traffic and even closure of several airspaces for several weeks. The same goes for what are called supervolcanoes like that of Yellowstone in North America or that of Lake Lach in Germany. The pressures necessary for such eruptions as well as the quantities of material ejected during these super eruptions cannot be explained with a depth of cut of the remains as indicated in the hollow earth theories. We can add to this the plate tectonics, this permanent movement of the bark terrestrial of the different continental plates navigating the mantle magmatic, and generates both a large part of earthquakes and permanent modification of the Earth's surface. According to the theory commonly accepted hollow Earth, the thickness of the Earth's crust going from the surface where we walk to the limit of the internal cavity of the Earth is about 800 kilometers. If this thickness may seem enormous, it is absolutely not sufficient to maintain the necessary temperature to fuck the faction of the magma mantle on which the plates sail. Moreover, this view generally admits that gigantic openings located at the north and south poles of the Earth allow passage from the outside to the inside or vice versa, as well as the gas exchanges necessary to maintain the internal atmosphere of the hollow Earth, or such openings would prevent the random displacement of the different plates, which if this happened either boucheray for all or part of these pole openings either would require the continental land masses swirled around these openings in a permanent and non-random rotary motion as we observe them today with subduction zones and ridges, and this phenomenon is perfectly observable like Iceland located on the mid-Atlantic ridge. The western part of the island lies on the North American plate while the eastern part is on the plate Eurasian, and one can see visually that these two parties moves away from each other about 2 to 3 centimeters per year. Direct observation therefore goes against the theory of the Earth digs, or at least the observation goes against this vision of the Earth hollow, because indeed if this hypothesis of a center of our planet as being totally hollow hardly seems consistent with our surface observations, it may only be an extremist view of this hypothesis. A fourth possibility, that the close to the middle way is still possible, that of a partial hollow Earth. This possibility allows to match both observations and analyzes physical but also the various testimonies on this subject. This vision of hollow Earth retains our current Cartesian understanding composed of different geological layers from a ferrous core central to the Corsican surface terrestrial. However, without glimpsing gigantic opening at the pole, the thickness of the Earth's crust exterior would allow the existence of sometimes gigantic quality of several tens of square kilometers generated by the expulsion of the various underground gas from the magmatic mantle. These underground cavities, these monumental caves, could be connected to the surface by different natural conduits such as extinct volcanic vents used to empty its gas or magma chambers that it initially contained, thereby a certain atmosphere or at least a gas exchange with the atmosphere of surface could be made, transforming these underground cavities into real possible place of life, sheltered and protected from the tumultuous world of the surface surface this vision of the hollow Earth therefore seems much more plausible as inadequacy with our current knowledge. However, certain observations or certain hypotheses do not allow fully validate it. For example, the gradual increase in temperature in proportion to the depth, what is called commonly the geothermal gradient. According to this physical law of our terrestrial geology, the temperature increases as one sinks into the depths of the Earth 30 degrees by kilometer. So if we go down to 25 kilometers deep, the temperature would rise at around 750 degrees, which would prevent any form of life and development. But the huge partial hollow Earth cavity can be located between 1 and 10 kilometers deep could experience a variant of this law of geothermal gradient. The different leads connecting them to the surface could allow some form of natural exchange ventilation at the both gaseous but also thermal, drastically lowering the temperature in these underground spaces, as well as the presence of rivers or underground lakes around these areas would eventually allow a lowering of the temperature anyway. If this vision of the hollow Earth seems the most likely, it comes up against certain our physical laws which can only be limited by our current knowledge. If the hypothesis of gigantic caves can be admitted, how to explain this obstinacy and this stubbornness of men to believe in an intelligent civilization live under our feet? Testimonies of contact with these underground peoples can easily lead us to wonder about the veracity of his words and the persuasive capacity of the literary works of genius of past centuries only give it even more credit. Among its legendary works we can notably quote the novel by Jules Verne, Voyage to Center of the Earth, dating from the end of the 19th century. In this how gripping story, the author tells us the story of a German scientist who, following the discovery of a coded runic parchment, decides to go to expedition accompanied by his nephew and an Icelandic guide on a most leading towards the center of the Earth. This is how, by following the indications of the parchment, the three friends are found in the bowels of the Earth, or a real world lost underground, will unveil a forest populated by prehistoric mastodons, a true underground mother populated by aquatic dinosaurs, and even wild and unknown human civilization will thus come to be revealed to the eyes of the three explorers. A return also violent that suddenly towards the surface will sound the death knell of this expedition, leaving in the collective imagination the fictitious memory of an intra-world terrestrial. Certainly it is in this example only a literary work romanticized, and therefore cannot take it as true testimony or proof of the existence of internal members on our planet, but the multitude of details and the scientific coherence of this novel associated with the quasi-divinatory capacities of its author can be considered a source form of this hollow Earth myth. However, fictitious accounts are not the only known view of this hypothesis, and many testimonies, sometimes extremely credible, can perhaps bring us a part of the truth. We can notably quote the expedition of the Admiral Byrd recounted in his personal logbook. Richard Byrd, against Admiral of the US Navy, would have lived in 1947 during an expedition to the North Pole, a simply extraordinary adventure. As he flew over the icy North Pole, Admiral Byrd would have seen in the heart of this universe Anger, a green valley located at the foot of a small mountain range. The lush vegetation, this tropical garden lost in a desert of ice, were traversed by freshwater rivers and a very atypical fauna. The aviator of the American Army there would have seen what he would describe as a mastodon strangely resembling mammoth. The temperature reading in this lost valley will even indicate about 20 degrees, leaving totally puzzled the explorers. After losing radio contact with the basic aircraft controls will seem to stop responding to pilots. Several resplendent disc-shaped aircraft will suddenly come escorted the plane of the Admiral Byrd. These flying machines were so close that the American military could see the inscriptions on their fuselage. They will represent them in their report as some kind of swastikas. After engines and was stopped and control of the aircraft was taken by unknown external force, a radio message sounded, a reassuring voice there stipulated that they were going to land them. The plane will land a few minutes later to pull gently towards the ground with the engine off without any maneuver was carried out by the crew. The Admiral will then see in this valley a sparkling city before several individuals approach the device. These men were tall and blonde-haired. A voice then calmly ordered to the Admiral to open the doors of the ship. The latter runs to east, dismounted from the aircraft accompanied by its radio operator. Cordially welcomed by the individuals present on site, they will be led on a €100 transport platform that will quickly take them to direction of the scintillating city. Once there, the Admiral will be invited to follow two individuals. They will then descend into an elevator for several minutes. Arrived in a huge room with colored lights, the Admiral is granted an audience with the one who will be qualified as M. The military of the US Navy will then receive a but wise on behalf of this individual. He will explain to him that he was chosen chosen for his human qualities and for its popular status with those on the surface. He then states that he was in the field of arts, yani the world inside the earth. The purpose of this interview was to warn humanity against the nuclear threat developed during the Second World War and which had been used twice against Japan if this people had never interfered with surface humanity until then. During the previous wars and various intrasect battles of the men, the global threat posed by nuclear weapons now forced them to get in touch with us in order to warn us about the threat destructive atomic energy. Following this interview, Admiral Byrd and his radio operator were released and escorted back to their plane, and 2 aircraft escorted them back to leave the area. The crew will then regain control aircraft and return to the military base from which the expedition was initially part. If this testimony is extremely controversial since well obviously never made official, the information they contain are as for them extremely interesting concerning in particular the hypothesis of the hollow earth and of an intraterrestrial civilization. The secret logbook of Admiral Byrd would therefore demonstrate, if it turned out to be correct, that not only a terrestrial underworld exist, but above all that a civilization humanoids advanced by several centuries on ours reside there. However, the notes of the admiral of the US Navy do not leave us more information on the origins and history of this intraterrestrial people. On any description or additional information other than that brought in this personal logbook would therefore only be pure speculation. However, several very interesting things. Firstly, the peaceful nature of these beings. Although obviously possessing an extremely advanced technology, the Aryas nor does not seem inclined to conflict. The individuals who hosted the Admiral Byrd and his crew were unarmed. He seemed very courteous, polite and benevolent. Experience. Korea lived. Richard Byrd in 1947 was carried out without violence or threats. More, the message of the master of this people for humanity from the surface is clearly a message of peace and a warning to our self-destruction possible with the acquisition of atomic energy as well as the destruction of the various biotopes and other forms of the planet. Secondly, this civilization seems to have been present on Earth since extremely long. Since 1, it has a technological development impressive, and that of 2, the master clearly states that they are so far never intervened in surface conflicts, which implies therefore that they observe and retreat our species and its development for a long time. However, the repeated use of the term your race for surface humanity also implies that they do not or not precisely Homo sapiens sapiens, while being a priori very close to our species if we are to believe the descriptions of the Admiral of all evidence. If this intraterrestrial civilization of Ariadne does exist there, it can only be a very ancient race of humanoids that existed long before the advent of our own civilization. However, the reasons for their removal from the surface and their geolocation in the intra-Earth still remains a mystery today. If the testimony of Admiral Byrd may seem to be only a second part of the more sci-fi focused, late 1940s Jules Verne novel Some Testimonials. Happier Jobs will allow us to come to enlighten a little more. It is the assumption the hollow earth to inhabit it was notably the case for Roman Sprioux, geographer, lecturer and amateur researchers passionate during a personal experience he lived in America Central, transcribed during a conference on the alternative media wall on TV, where he was able to widely disseminate his testimony. Information gathered during this atypical experience offers us a panel possibilities of understanding on this subject. This testimony, as precise and detailed that moving, brings a particularly sincere light and contemporary to the intra-earth, this underground world, and the Guy people. Tomorrow left in 2015 for a period of 15 days in the Ecuadorian jungle in order to follow shamanic ceremony of Roman ayahuasca prayers will be fine despite himself plunging into an adventure straight out of the major science fiction scenarios. The aim of these ceremonies is to allow participants through local plants used for almost 4,000 years as ayahuasca, for example, to liberate the spirit of the material hold of our members, to get in touch spiritual with the energies of nature, the fundamental elements and immaterial that life forms. During one of these ceremonies, supervised by an experienced shaman, Roman Sprioux will experience what some would call for an extra bodily outing. He will make an intangible journey that will change his existence forever and will change his view of our history and our past. After having ingested the potion in Basta Yamaska, it was literally as in zero gravity before, to be drawn into a vortex that it aspires to towards the center of the earth, towards an underground world. He felt called, invited to join this intraterrestrial place where only the mystery seems to be our certainty. Will then find himself posted on a rocky platform within a gigantic caves whose disproportion did not allow him to glimpse the limits physical. A deep and soothing sound like the Tibetan mantras came to fill the immensity of this underground place, offering a feeling of serenity and well-being. Music. An individual then presenting himself in front of him hooded like a monk, The latter welcomed him to this place, which he presented as one of the countless community of peoples underground of the planet. According to reports, several million ray entities reside in the intra-world, but this precise place, this gigantic cave where Roman prizes were came to enter, was the place of residence of an Atlantean colony to take refuge here for nearly 12,000 years. The individual then stipulated that he was indeed human brother of those of the surface, and that they had migrated in the intra-earth during the phase of destruction of the Atlantean Empire, belonging to the community of flax thread dedicated to spiritual development, well-being and the blossoming of life. They made the servant no longer reside in a world where the forces of darkness, the dark side of humanity, could extend his hold on the world, so they took refuge under the surface earth in these underground places and hidden away from outside gaze, taking with them the history of their ancient civilization, millennial and continuing from the bowels of the earth to a the development and well-being of life on this planet. This is how, while keeping an eye on the surface world bathed in daylight, these Atlantean refugees watch over and protect the whole of Gaia, resounding in the depths of the earth the mantras and the sacred prayers that can be a barrier to the destructive forces of this world physical. This testimony cannot, unfortunately, not be confirmed by any material evidence, since it is only a personal and intangible experience, but that Robin Priu and only the appreciation of everyone will give it its veracity. But we can remove several extremely interesting elements. Firstly, it is for a faith, a contemporary testimony, the AQ by a man of our time with whom we can therefore interact and communicate, and not from a story dating back decades or centuries. Secondly, and although this point is totally subjective, as free to the interpretation of each one, we can note the sincerity and the emotion which cross this testimony, which can be considered as a pledge of the authenticity of the lived experience. And finally, thirdly, the precision of information transmitted, since for once the name and history precision of this intra-terrestrial people is transcribed to us from this contact, it would therefore be possible that at least one of the peoples living under the surface of the earth in this partial hollow earth be all simply Atlantean descendants of refugees from mythical Atlantis, and more precisely the community of the sons of one of its ancient monks, working the elevation of spirituality and the flourishing of Atlantean life underground. Here is an idea that might seem absurd, came out of the overflowing imagination of a novelist in search of inspiration. The myth of Atlantis is indisputably linked nowadays to writings of Plato, Greek philosopher of the 4th century BC, and in particular to those works entitled May 10th and the Christian. Most intriguing with this testimony, and that if we correlate it direct with the words of Plato, and which we do not take it, everything seems coherent indeed in the description of the destruction of Atlantis described in his book The Team. And Trays writes, but in the time that followed there were earthquakes and floods extraordinary, and in the space of a single harmful day and night all you had of fighters was swallowed up in one fell swoop in the land, and leal Atlantis having been damaged in the disappeared sea. Even if we limit to the basic reading of this text, if we take literally what is written for information, we can read that the continent of Atlantis, the island on which the constructions were based, was Team Hergé, is gone under water. But at the same time it is clearly stipulated that the individuals, those who are named as fighters, on submerged under the earth. This strange differentiation between the physical destination of some individuals found underground and that of the continent of Atlantis ending under the sea could therefore come to support the testimony of Roman. Furthermore, if the term combatants first of all makes us think of soldiers or to a warrior army, it could perfectly well be the idea of spiritual fighters. The threads of flax work in to fight the shadow forces responsible for the collapse of this island empire. The proof of the veracity of the testimony of Roman Priu may not be found not on a photograph or sound recording, but everything simply in a text dating back more than 2,000 years. For all those who doubt the physical possibility to remain underground, to be able to establish a civilization, or just be able to live there, loire daylight and fresh surface air, do not forget that many examples show us that nowadays, as by the past, the heart of the earth was a very coveted refuge. For example, since the Second World War, the military bases of very great depths, whether under the ice of the poles or several km underground, are true underground cities, allowing to remain there without contact direct with the outside. But these modern constructions are not the prerogative of human genius, since the underground city of Deryankolo in Turkey date, and without any certainty, to about 800 BC, spans at least 8 floors to over 60 meters deep, dug directly into the rock. It is estimated that this underground city could house more than 20,000 people with livestock, and will live for an indefinite period of time. time equipped with ventilation ducts for supplying residential water to places of cult, and even heavy sliding stone doors of the Kuyu rings, was a real intraterrestrial refuge for civilization's ancient times. The basement of our planet therefore seems to be a suitable place for mysteries and cover-up, but we haven't talked until now that of our physical plane, because according to the different visions of our world of other hypotheses would place the world's intraterrestrial on another vibratory plane. It could then be a question of a non-physical internal world totally immaterial and vibrating on another plane. Only the astral bodies, the spirits, could thus access it in the image of out-of-body experiences, where some people manage to navigate our world in an intangible form. But since we evolve on a plane physical material, and if one believes the various testimonies so much written oral, it could well be that this crater, this subterranean world sheltering our several civilizations, is indeed physical. Obviously the undersoils of our planet, that they are just a crucible sheltering two gigantic caverns, remains a mystery that has nourished the imagination of men for millennia. Of the divine kingdom to make it a lost world, passing by the refuge of the last survivors Atlanta, an inaudible voice but yet very present seems to whisper in our ears that many answers to our countless questions may well be found just below our feet. My channel name have changed from Enlil and Enki to the Intergalactic Melanidid Squadron. My merch with an awesome proved is out. Check out the link in the description for more details.